All right, everyone, get ready, because today we are diving deep, deep into The Courage to be Disliked. This book unpacks the world of Adlerian psychology and, you know what's so cool about it? It's written like a dialogue. A young man and a philosopher going back and forth, kind of like what we're doing here.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're right there with them, learning all about this guy, Alfred Adler. He's often called the third giant of psychology.
Mhm.
You've got Freud, you've got Jung, and then there's Adler.
Exactly. And, when I first saw the title, The Courage to be Disliked, I was like, whoa, hold on a sec. That's a pretty bold statement to make, right? Can we really be free from, needing everyone to like us? Is that even possible?
Well, that's the big question this book tries to answer. And to really get Adler, we need to understand how he's different from someone like Freud, for example.
Yeah.
See, Adlerian psychology, it challenges this idea that our past, like all our traumas and stuff,
Yeah.
that it controls our present.
So instead of digging into childhood to understand our problems, Adlerian psychology goes in a totally different direction.
Yeah, you could say that. It shifts from causes to goals. We call this teleology. Basically, it means we act to achieve certain things, not just because of stuff that happened in the past.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to get this straight. So it's not that our past doesn't matter. It's more that it doesn't completely define us. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, you got it. The book gives this really interesting example. There's a guy, right? He's been a shut-in for years, and the philosopher argues that this guy, he's choosing to be a shut-in, not just because of past stuff, but because it helps him achieve a goal, like maybe avoiding social anxiety or something.
Well, wait a minute. Are we saying that being a shut-in is a choice? I mean, that sounds kind of harsh, doesn't it?
I know, it can sound that way. But it's important to see the difference between objective facts and subjective interpretations. We all go through tough stuff, right? But it's how we interpret those experiences that really shapes us in the present.
Hmm.
There's another example in the book. This time it's the philosopher himself. He felt inferior because he was short. But then, later on, he changed his thinking. He saw his height as a good thing, actually.
So what you're saying is we can reframe even things that seem negative
Yeah,
to work for us in some way.
yeah, you got it. It's about recognizing that we have control, even in tough situations. Now, going back to that shut-in example, sure, maybe his past played a role, but the way he interprets things now, plus his goal of avoiding anxiety, that's what keeps him stuck.
Okay, I see what you mean. It's definitely a new way of thinking for me. But I'm starting to get it. It challenges this whole idea that we're just products of our past.
Absolutely. Adler said it best himself. No experience is in itself a cause of our success or failure. We do not suffer from the shock of our experiences. We make out of them whatever suits our purposes.
Wow, that's a powerful quote. It makes you feel like you really do have more control
Okay.
than you might think. But okay, let's get real for a sec. How does all of this work in our relationships? What does Adlerian psychology have to say about how we connect with people?
Well, that takes us to another big idea, denying the desire for recognition. Adler believed that if we're always seeking validation, we end up living someone else's life. We're trying to meet their expectations, not our own.
Okay, I'm really curious about this desire for recognition thing. Can you give me an example, like in a real relationship?
Sure, there's this story in the book about a woman. She's got this fear of blushing, and the philosopher suggests that she's actually created this symptom to avoid telling a man how she feels because she's afraid of rejection. It's like a defense mechanism.
Wow, that's fascinating. Makes you think about how many of our own fears come from wanting people to like us. But if we're always seeking validation, how do we ever escape that trap? How do we stop worrying about what others think?
Well, Adler had a solution for that too. He called it the separation of tasks. It's about understanding whose problem is whose and not meddling in other people's business.
Okay, I'm listening. Give me an example. What does separation of tasks look like in real life?
All right, the book uses the example of parents who force their kids to study. It argues that studying is the child's task, and the parent butting in, even if they mean well, can actually make things worse.
So if the parent steps back and lets the child own their studies, that's separation of tasks in action.
Exactly. And this applies to all sorts of relationships. Romantic relationships, friendships, work.
It's about respecting boundaries.
Exactly. Knowing we can only control ourselves, our thoughts, emotions, and actions.
Okay, but hold on. If we take this separation of tasks thing too far, doesn't it become selfish? Like, are we supposed to just ignore everyone else's needs?
That's a good point. But it's not about being selfish. It's about recognizing that we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves.
So it's about focusing on what we can actually do.
Yeah, and that leads us to how we actually put these ideas into practice. Adlerian psychology talks about creating horizontal relationships instead of vertical ones.
Okay, now you got my attention. What's the difference between horizontal and vertical?
Well, think of a vertical relationship like a ladder. Someone's on top, someone's on the bottom. Praise and rebuke are common in these relationships, and they can be used to manipulate, even if
Like,
unintentionally.
can you give me an example?
Imagine a boss who praises an employee, not because they really mean it, but to get them to work harder. Or a parent who criticizes their child constantly, making them feel
Oh,
inadequate.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So how do we create these horizontal relationships then?
It's about equality and respect. Instead of praise and rebuke, we use encouragement. It's about recognizing effort and seeing the worth of a person, regardless of what they achieve or mess up.
Encouragement sounds powerful. Can you give me an example of what that looks like?
Sometimes the simplest things are best. A genuine thank you can go a long way. It shows gratitude without any judgment or strings attached.
Wow, I never thought of thank you like that. It really changes things, doesn't it? Okay, but what about those really tough relationships? The ones that feel impossible to fix? Does the Adlerian psychology have anything to say about those?
Well, the book actually tells a personal story about the philosopher's relationship with his father. It was strained. But he used these Adlerian principles to mend it. He focused on his own tasks, let go of trying to change his dad, and eventually found a new way to connect.
That's amazing. It shows you can change things, even in the toughest situations. This whole deep dive is really making me think about all my relationships in a new way.
That's what Adlerian psychology is all about, really. It's not just theory, it's practical. It helps us see ourselves and others differently.
This is all so fascinating, but there's one big question I have if I embrace all of this. What does Adlerian psychology say about happiness? Where does that fit in?
Well, Adler had a very specific view on happiness. He believed that happiness is the feeling of contribution.
Happiness is the feeling of contribution. Okay, that sounds simple enough. But I bet there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. Like, what did he really mean by feeling like you're contributing?
It's about recognizing that you, just by existing, your actions, even the little things, they benefit the community, something larger than yourself.
So it's not about, like, doing these grand gestures
Mm.
or achieving something huge. It's more about the everyday ways we impact those around us.
Yeah, exactly. It's about shifting our focus from wanting recognition to recognizing that we're all connected. The book tells this really moving story about the philosopher's grandfather. He went through this horrific experience in the war, but he still chose to see the world as a good place.
Wow.
He focused on the kindness he received and found purpose in helping others.
That's powerful. It shows you can find that feeling of contributing even when things are tough. But doesn't this idea of happiness being tied to contribution kind of clash with the separation of tasks thing? If we're not supposed to worry about other people's expectations, how can we really feel like we're contributing?
That's a great question. Remember, separation of tasks is about knowing what you can control and what you can't. It's not about ignoring everyone else or isolating yourself. Actually, it's by focusing on our own tasks and what we're responsible for that we become more capable of contributing to the community.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. So it's more about shifting our motivation. Instead of seeking approval, we genuinely want to contribute.
Right, and it's not about being perfect either. We can still contribute even with our flaws, even while we're still figuring things out.
This is really resonating with me. It's like finding that balance, taking care of ourselves and respecting our own boundaries, but at the same time, recognizing that our actions do have an effect on others.
Exactly. And this actually ties into another interesting idea from Adlerian psychology, the courage to be normal.
The courage to be normal. Wait, what? This sounds kind of counterintuitive, right? Don't we all want to be special and stand out, to be extraordinary?
Well, yeah, our culture does kind of push that, right? Like, we need to be exceptional to be happy. But Adler is saying that real fulfillment, a lot of times, comes from embracing the ordinary, finding joy in the everyday things, in just being human.
Oh, so it's like finding the joy in the journey, not just focusing on the destination. It's those quiet moments of connection, the little acts of kindness and service, the stuff that might not be flashy, but it makes a real difference.
You got it. It's about appreciating what's happening right now instead of constantly chasing some future goal.
This makes me think about all those times I've put off happiness, like, I'll be happy when I achieve X. What if happiness is available right now, right here in this moment?
That's the beauty of it. It's inviting us to find that joy and meaning right now in the ordinary stuff that makes up our lives.
This idea of like life being a dance, a series of moments, that really speaks to me. But if life is like a dance, wouldn't that make it hard to set goals and make plans? I mean, if we're just focusing on the here and now, how do we create a life we love?
It's not that Adlerian psychology says we shouldn't plan at all. It's more about finding the meaning and purpose in each step, rather than seeing life as this straight line to some predetermined endpoint.
So instead of just trying to get to the top of the mountain, we enjoy each step along the way, the challenges, the views, the whole experience.
Exactly. Embrace the whole thing, not just the end result. And this connects back to teleology, remember. We can have goals, but it's the striving, the actions we take right now that really shape our lives.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. But here's a question that keeps popping up for me. If life is this dance, this series of moments, how do we navigate those moments without getting lost? What's our guide if we let go of needing approval and those old ideas of success?
Wow, that's a profound question. It's really at the heart of Adlerian psychology. If we don't need external validation, what internal guide can we use? How do we make choices that are true to ourselves and lead to a fulfilling life?
That's a huge question, and honestly, it makes me want to rethink a lot of things.
It challenges us to look inward, to figure out our own beliefs and values, to define what really matters to us deep down. It's about finding our own unique internal compass.
An internal compass. Okay, that sounds kind of mysterious. Can you tell me more about that? Like, what is this internal compass and how do we even find it?
It's not a literal compass, it's more like a feeling, like a deep inner guide that helps us make choices that are right for us.
Okay, I think I get what you mean, but how do we even access that? It seems kind of hard to grasp.
It starts with getting to know yourself better. Like, ask yourself, what really makes me happy? What are those activities that make me feel alive and engaged? Think about the times you felt most fulfilled, most like yourself. What were you doing? Who were you with? What was driving you?
So it's like paying attention to those times when things feel right, when we're on the right path, even if we don't know exactly why.
Yeah, exactly. And, our values often show up in our actions, even the small everyday stuff. What are your priorities? What do you always say yes to? And what do you always say no to? Those choices tell you a lot about what's important to you.
This reminds me of that separation of tasks idea. It's
Yeah.
about focusing on what we can control, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're taking ownership of our choices
Yeah.
and making them consciously based on those inner values we're discovering.
It's a great point. And remember, it's not about being perfect or having it all figured out. It's about being aware, being intentional, and being open to changing course as we learn and grow.
This whole deep dive has been about shifting perspectives, hasn't it? From the past to the future, from external validation to that inner compass.
It's realizing the power we have to choose how we see the world, how we interpret our experiences, and how we live our lives. It's this idea that we can create a life that's meaningful, even with all the challenges and setbacks that come our way.
This has been an amazing journey. We've dug into Adlerian psychology, found some hidden treasures, and honestly, I'm feeling a renewed sense of hope. Like we've been given a fresh pair of glasses to see the world through.
That's the power of these ideas, right? They change how we think, how we live, how we relate to each other, how we face life's ups and downs.
Absolutely. To all our listeners out there, remember, the courage to be disliked is also the courage to be you, to embrace your own path, to create a life that truly reflects who you are deep down, even if it means going against the grain. It's a journey worth taking, and I'm so glad you joined us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep listening to that inner compass.